Hello guys, it's Ryan Ho back with another video. Today I want to talk about the three Audio-Technica headphones. They're open back studio headphones. Their most legendary headphone is the M50X, but we now have a new R50X, which is an open back variant, and we're going to see if this is going to be the new kind of studio headphone default. And then we also have the R70XA. This is a much more expensive one. The 50 is $170. The R70 is $380. So it's more expensive. And the question is the price difference worth it over the R50X? And then what improvements have they made to the R70XA? Since this is technically the second version of this headphone, and see how that compares. Obviously, these are studio headphones. So like you can actually use these honestly to make music. You can also just use them to listen to music, and I'll talk about how they are in gaming as well. But you can use it for all those different functionalities. And then we also have the other one, which is the R30X, which is their kind of cheapest one. This thing is about $110, so it's the cheapest one on the table. Now I'm gonna say the R30X to me is kind of like the one that has the biggest performance difference. I think the R50X is a lot closer to something like the R70XA. So anyways, I actually did a full review of these two if you guys are interested in that, but I also compare them to the R70XA here. Taking a closer look at the R70XA, so we have this new nice build they have. Honestly, this headphone does look beautiful. It is kind of like all, I guess, metal or aluminum. It feels very kind of sturdy. And then we also have this kind of new headband design. They used to have those like wing tip ones. Now they've went to more traditional type of suspension type of band. I've also reviewed the R70X Refined by Apos Audio, so I have that one down too, and I've listened to the original one as well. So I definitely know how this headphone sounds. I would say this one sounds pretty similar to the prior one with some slight updates and slight improvements. Now, the grill itself is kind of this nice metal grill. You can see the nice driver. It has this whole entire extension that's also made of metal, and the headband as well is also made of metal. It's pretty easy to adjust. You can just kind of go up and down, because kind of has kind of all you would expect for the pivot and the swivel. So this thing is pretty comfortable. But I would say the standout feature of this is the fact that it's really lightweight. So if you put it on the scale, it doesn't really weigh that much. So on the scale, this is actually 163 grams for the R70XA. The R50X, it's a little heavier at 210. I think it's because this has these nice big pads up there, so they would probably add more to the weight than the design of the R70XA. But honestly, neither of these are heavy at all. They're very lightweight and easy to kind of wear. And honestly, this kind of difference in weight and these difference in band, like this one has these kind of plushes that kind of lie on your head on the R50X, and I don't really find them to be honestly uncomfortable on either one. I could wear either one. They're both lightweight to me, so I don't think that actually makes much of a difference. So another thing I noticed is what makes this unique is the suspension band actually has these little magnets, so you can actually just take this off, and it actually just hooks on with magnets, and that's how it kind of is bound to the top of the headband. I think it's a very unique design that I haven't seen, but it makes this easily adjustable. You can obviously pull this and kind of move it around, because these different slots, you can kind of slot it in. So I like this kind of new design that they have. I think it's very creative. It's not something I've seen before. And then of course, we can also take a look at these ear pads. These ear pads are actually really well and easy to remove. I would say, you just kind of pull and take them off. They're actually similar on both of these headphones, but right here you can see their new design. They kind of have this like foam around the driver, but then you can see the driver itself is also protected with this nice metal gate. But I don't really see like an angled driver on here, so they didn't really update it with that on these line. But yeah, it's really easy to kind of replace and put on the pads. And of course, the last thing we want to talk about is the ear pads itself. I find the ear pads to be honestly not as comfortable as the R50X. Yeah, if you look at the R50X ear pads and this one, they actually look very different, right? The R50X ones are just a lot more plushy and much more like velvety. It's a lot softer, and the texture is a lot better than even the R70X. So I don't know, it's interesting that they have better pads on this one. I do find them more comfortable on the R50X. So it's funny when you actually do the comparison between these two headphones, and You know, like I said, there's a $200 difference, but honestly, the build between these two is almost exactly the same. I'd say the build quality is basically the same, so you don't really feel like the R50 is worse than the R70, like I said, in the build quality. In fact, this actually even has the logo like imprinted on there. And so I feel like this logo itself looks like a little bit nicer. And then even the actual color of this is actually, you can see that the whole grill is kind of black and it has a more unified kind of color look to it. And the pads are all black. So overall, I find I guess the R50X to be more cohesive in the color and look nicer, but even the build quality is slightly different, but I wouldn't say it's much worse. And you know, you can also see this cable, right? So the R50X actually has one termination and then it connects to both sides. So you can see that it runs a wire from both the right and the left versus this one is kind of typical kind of dual termination of both left and right. So, I mean, I would say the wiring of the R50X is actually more studio-like and it's a little bit harder to achieve. So that makes it a little bit, I guess, fancier in that sense. But honestly, besides those differences, they're pretty much the same. So, I mean, I don't really see the difference in build quality price-wise. And even driver-wise between these two headphones, they're honestly very similar. They even say that the R50X is just basically based on the same driver as the R70, but it's just made to be more efficient and play better. And I really think that does translate a lot to what I actually hear. So if you listen to the sound of these two headphones, they really are very similar in technical. Like, I honestly don't really hear that much of a difference between the actual like performance of the driver. So like, I feel like you're getting a lot more value with R50X being less than half the price at 170 versus 380. So I mean, this is going to lead to something hilarious when I talk about the sound, but I really do think the R50X kind of just feels like the new R70X. Honestly, like I feel like the R70XA, in my honest opinion, feels like it's just kind of a continuation of the old model. It kind of sounds very similar, but slightly refined. But yeah, so let's talk about sound, right? So like I said, the R70XA is just a slightly refined version of the R70X. And the R50X is honestly, it feels like the new R70X. Like they made all the updates and changes on this headphone versus they kept the R70XA just pretty much very similar to before. I think there's a good reason for that, right? I think the R70XA really is a headphone that's going to be sold to people who already own the R70X. It's just going to be a slight upgrade. So the whole entire sound is very similar to what it was before. And they didn't really change too much about it, right? They're basically kind of saying like, if you like this headphone, we're going to allow you to buy the same headphone with slight updates to it, but you're really going to be able to use it in the same way you were using it before. So when I listen to it, this thing basically has the same kind of bass and slight sub-bass roll-off that the original R70X had. This thing also has kind of the treble of it is kind of like not really overly emphasized. It's actually slightly warm sounding like the original R70X. The mid-range is the best part about it as well. And this overall is a very smooth and easy to listen to headphone. And I think if you're listening to a lot of vocals, they definitely kind of get pushed forward and sound very natural on this. Though it is slightly dark in like the uppermost, like highest treble regions of this thing. But overall, this is just a really easy to listen to headphone like the old one was. However, I would say the R50X sounds like a better studio headphone in my opinion. I feel like they basically made all the updates that I would expect them to do on the R70XA. Instead, they made it $200 cheaper and called it the R50X, right? So what am I talking about? So obviously, the first thing I noticed when you go to R50X is that it has just more bass and more sub bass. All right, so I swapped the pads from the R70X and the R50X. So you can see this has a nice velvet one of the R70X. Doesn't have the logo right here. I found that the sound differences between these are more attributed to the driver than the actual ear pads. So I found that the R70X is still a pretty warm sounding, so the treble isn't that bright. I still found the R50X to be brighter, so it definitely has more to do with the driver kind of differences in design rather than the ear pads. Now the ear pads do change the sound, not by much, but they do change it a little bit. I still think the stock pads of each respective headphone is still better. And I do notice that the ones that came on the R70X. I think the R70X pads are actually a little bit better at having better soundstage. They seem to let the sound kind of leak out a little bit more. And I find that the Velvet ones seem to keep the sound in, so the soundstage seems worse, but I guess your bass is a tiny bit better. So I think those are the differences between them. I still prefer the comfort of the R50X Velvet pads, but I would say the sound properties of the R70X kind of pads are a little bit better. I think it just sounds slightly more detailed and more spacious sounding. But anyways, the R50X does have better bass. It goes lower, you get more sub bass, so that is overall an easily improvement over the R70XA. But the other improvement you hear on the R50X is that it has just better vocal performance and more treble. So I do find that this one is maybe slightly bright, honestly, but it sounds a little bit more natural and the notes are finished a little bit better and you can hear the detail better on the R50X over the R70XA, where in the treble it just sounds a little bit too warm. You know, I kind of wish it had a little bit more emphasis up there, and that I think is maybe overcompensated a little bit on the R50X, but not too much. Like, I still prefer the sound of this one over the R70XA, especially if I'm in like a studio environment. But I would say one thing is that R70XA is just an easier to listen to headphone. You're not going to get too much trouble. You're going to be able to listen to this headphone for a very, very long time. So if you're playing games or just want to listen to music and chill, I feel like this R70XA is just a little bit of a chiller type of sound that you can kind of enjoy, versus, you know, the R50X is going to be a little bit more in your face, a little bit more exciting type of sound. And it sounds just a little bit more, I guess, V-shaped too on the 50X, because you're getting that more bass and that more treble emphasis. But overall, I think it leads to a better sound and a more studio-like quality, especially when this is marketed for, you know, the studio use. Especially, you know, the legendary M50X is very popular, and the R50X being, you know, just kind of the continuation of that line, but on open back form, has to be a pretty good option. And I think this does achieve that with its price point, right? And so overall, I just find that the R50X also, like in the mid-range, has just, you know, the similar vocal performance as the R70XA. But I would say, like I said, it just sounds just a little bit more natural sounding overall. And the whole entire sound and the refinement of this headphone makes it, honestly, like I said, a better studio headphone for $200 less and the same build quality. Like, you're really not getting anything less with the 50X. It's almost confusing to me why it's called the R50X. It's almost like you assume it's like a cheaper, different variant, but it really isn't. It really just feels like the flat out upgrade, but also a cheaper price. Like, I feel like this is one of the best value products they have released, and I think this is pretty much a no-brainer option to get if you're going to get only one, honestly. And the R70XA, it seems like it's overpriced in comparison, but I think it's just because this is a good value, and this headphone only exists because there's users who love the previous R70X and they can just buy this one and replace it, and this kind of be their kind of minor upgrade to the old one. So another thing I'll talk about is gaming performance, right? So honestly, I find that they're both perform really well in games. I mean, I feel like you do hear a little bit more on the R50X. It's a little bit easier to tell the higher kind of noises and the lower type of noises. So I would say the R50X is a better choice. None of them have angled drivers, but both of their sound stages are pretty nice. You can tell the depth of things pretty well. So honestly, for gaming, they're both, you know, pretty good. I wouldn't say they're the best gaming headphones I've ever used, but they're definitely really, really good, and you can't go wrong with either. I would say the R70XA is just a little chiller to listen to. So if you're just playing a lot over a long period of time and you don't want kind of the trouble or anything to fatigue you, then I mean, this one will be better for that type of scenario. And when it comes to sound stages, you know, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I think the R70XA has, you know, a little bit more sound stage. I don't know why. I really think it's because of the ear pads. They kind of let the sound through a little bit more, because it just sounds like, you know, that was the biggest difference when I swapped the pads. So, I mean, that instance, the R70XA would win in sound stage. And then in detail and stuff between these two, like, honestly, they're so close. They're so neck to neck. I don't really feel like the R70XA has more detail. In fact, I feel like the R50X actually sounds like it has more detail to me by slightly, if anything, but they're very, very, very close in performance. So I don't really think you're getting much of a difference, especially with that, price difference. The driver performance is very similar, but the R50X is obviously a more efficient headphone, right? So you don't really need an amplifier for this versus R70XA is like 470 ohms, which is a lot. I would definitely recommend an amplifier to listen to this. Obviously, you can plug in stuff without an amplifier, but it might sound just a little bit weaker, a little bit more anemic sounding. So yeah, the R50X is just gonna be cheaper to run. You could run on your phone and stuff like that easier. I mean, you could run this on your phone too. It just might not sound as great as something kind of beefier and big on the R70XA. And then of course the R30X. I would say this one really is just not that good. Honestly, this thing is $110. I think it really just exists because, you're trying to get a price point. Some people only have like $100 to kind of spend on a headphone. Then you would get the R30X. I would say if you can stretch your budget a little bit more, I would definitely buy the R50X. I mean, like I said, this is comparable to their $380 line. So like that extra $50 is you're getting a lot more headphone, I think, out of the R50X, and I really do stand by that. And I mean, even the driver sizes are smaller. You have attached cable. The whole entire build is just completely, less. It's not as good as the R50X. So if I were you, I would stretch it for this one. And I think that kind of leads me to the conclusion of the R50X is pretty much the new successor, the best value of the headphones. I actually think this is a good headphone for a lot of people, especially starting out. This really does give you that nice studio sound with maybe a little bit extra treble emphasis, but I think it's a very good value. And this is the headphone that I would vote as the one that's worth it amongst this lineup. And if I haven't really proven enough that it is a very, very good value. Anyways, I have more headphone videos here on my channel. You guys should check it out. I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers because I unlocked some more YouTube features. So I'm really trying to hit that this year. And yeah, if you guys can help me out, that would be appreciated. Stick around for more headphone content.